Hey, this is Duncan. This next engagement happens in Doral, entry system into the Curse region. It's an NPC system, so what that means is anyone can dock in the stations in this region, not just people who have Sov, like in regular Sovereign 00. So usually, this is not always true, but often you'll have smaller groups in NPC regions and larger groups in Sovereign 00. Again, entry systems are good because they're often systems with a lot of activity happening in them. So it's a lot more likely that you'll find fights here than other areas of 00. And many people like to get camp in entry systems. So what we have is a couple drakes. One's active tanked, which you'll be seeing the Fraps footage from the perspective of this active tanked drake, and the other's passive tanked. What we're going to jump into are 2 Hurricanes, a Tempest, Drake, and a couple Basilisks. Now generally, most people would think that something like this is not really engageable because they have 2 logistics, and you can't really outdamage even one of these Basilisks repping any of their ships. So it might be written off by some people as just completely unengageable, and they don't even bother trying. However, there is almost in every situation a way to get a fight and change the situation to be more advantageous to what you have. So our strategy jumping in is just to try to separate them away from the Basilisks. We don't know how the Basilisks are fit, but it turns out that they're afterburner fit, which is really good for us if we can manage to get any of their ships over 70 kilometers away from the Basilisks, which is the edge of the Basilisk repair range. So we jump in, and you won't see this in the Fraps, but the Fraps starts a little bit later because we didn't think that they would engage at all when we jumped in. But we jump in and we burn off a little bit, and they don't really seem too keen at the start because, you know, we're just a couple drakes. Perhaps they thought we had more and that we were just baiting with a couple drakes. So we shot the Hurricanes a little bit and moved off. But the important thing is that you don't want to burn off to where the range that you want to be at the end, because then, you know, they'll just see you so far away and lose complete interest in you, because they'll be like, oh, you're well off, and they'll realize very quickly that if they chase you, they'll be out of Basilisk rep range. So we kind of stay close to them until we get them interested and keen and thinking only about fighting us, not their position. And we try to get them 50, 60, 70 kilometers away from the gate, and a Drake along with a Tempest start moving past the Hurricanes. While the Hurricanes move back, the Drake and the Tempest keep shooting us and keep chasing us. Unfortunately for us, they picked the passive Drake, my own Drake, to shoot. And now the reason that's bad is that the passive Drake is eventually going to run out of shields and be forced off. While if they were shooting the active Drake, it'd be better, because it could just sort of tank them. Out of the 2 ships, between the Tempest and the Drake, we want to force the Tempest off more than the Drake. He's better able to project damage, and we're not sure if we can burn in and tackle one of these ships while keeping it from coming back with both of them there safely. So what we do is we shoot the Tempest. If he keeps burning, we'll eventually go in, but at the same time, one of our Drakes my own Drake is being forced to move at a damage range because he's so low in shields, and I'm not able to support Will's Drake to get full tackle on the Tempest. So we just sort of let him, go back towards the Basilisk. And this leaves the Drake, who still is coming towards us. And quickly, before I talk about the Drake, there's an overview bug in the video where I appear to be not moving 12 kilometers from Will's Drake at 0 velocity, and that's not really the case, it's just a bug. However, you just pay more attention to the brackets in space rather than the overview. And the rest of the overview is updating correctly for the rest of the fight. Anyway, we switch to this Drake, since the Tempest is moving back to his gang. And at this point, I have to make a decision about whether I'm going to stay or warp off in my passive Drake. Because I can't stay on grid and keep sustaining this damage. You can see on the watch list that I'm in really low shields, and I'm almost beginning to bleed armor, and we haven't even begun to do too much damage to this Drake. What I end up doing is burning away, and the reason that this is so effective against missile ships is because of the flight time of missiles. Since he's burning towards me, and I'm burning away from him, his effective range is maybe, instead of 70 kilometers, is probably closer to 60 kilometers. My effective range is a lot greater, and it's probably closer to 80 kilometers, because he's burning directly towards my missiles, and I'm burning directly away from his missiles. And that's an advantage of burning against missile ships when you're also in a missile ship. So by doing this, I'm able to mitigate pretty much all the incoming damage from him, since he's the only one shooting me. More than this, however, I want him to switch off of me, and I want him to shoot Willl and his active Drake, so I'm able to move in closer and support Willl and his active Drake, in case he gets tackled or something else happens. So I keep running out of his lock range, and at that point, he has nothing else to shoot but Willl. So if he switches to Willl, in the active Drake, he'll be able to tank him, and I'll be able to come in closer and support him. The next concern for us are the ECM drones launched by the Drake. Now, these are a concern because if Will's Drake gets tackled, and by that I mean scrammed or webbed and unable to make range or move his ships while he's jammed, he basically can't do anything at all about it. He can't web the target back, he can't fight it, he can't kill it, he can't lock or do anything. He's just basically stuck there. So it's really important for us to kill these ECM drones before we do anything else in this particular situation. In other situations it might be different. I myself on the passive Drake, I'm not really able to lock up the Drake anyway because I've moved out of range, and the ECM drones are closer, so I help Will out and kill the ECM drones as I start to burn back in and shoot this Drake, as he's not really focused on me, and he's not even really focused on Will. It seems like he's trying to get back to his gangmates and his Drake. At this point, we're going to go in for webs. Now, the reason we do it at this point is best spot to web him is when he's under 150 kilometers from the basilisks and above 70 kilometers. So that's sort of the dead zone for him, and in that range they can't warp to him and they can't repair him unless they burn and they're afterburner fitted. So once the ECM drones are down, we just go in, get webs, and finish him off. His friend in a Tempest warps off to bounce to try to come support him, but he decides better of it as he goes down, and he warps back to his gang mates on the gate. The Fraps cuts out at this point, but we're basically doing where it picks up again is we're repositioning closer to them and trying to get them interested in us again, perhaps trying the same thing again and getting them to move away from the basilisk just like we did. Their Drake has reshipped into a second Drake, and it's still the two of us trying to pull what we can away from the gate. At first, a couple of Hurricanes burn for us, and this is followed by the Drake and the Tempest. The Drake that died is aggressive as he was before, and both Hurricanes actually decide to turn back into Basilisk rep range, but this Tempest is really aggressive and decides to keep burning well past the rep range of the Basilisk. And since we had done the exact same thing to them before, we had to be pretty decisive about going in and webbing down this Tempest and killing him off. You can see we're overloading damage right away, and we're not worrying or bothering about any of the ECM drones because we don't feel that we have enough time to kill the ECM drones, and the Basilisks know what we're doing, and they're moving closer to the Tempest to try to get him repped. And we want to kill him as quickly as possible, and just taking the chance that we don't get jammed by the ECM drones. It's also possible that we could have gone for the Drake, which is also out of rep range, but the Tempest makes a better primary for us because it's closer, but also because it's a bigger threat. It's a ship that can project damage better, and it has heavy newts, which can really mess up the active tank of the Drake and the passive tank Drake as well, because the passive tank Drake has no way to get cap back, and if our passive Drake can't burn away and stay immobile, it can present a real challenge if he gets pointed while he's completely neuted out. You'll also notice that at this point a third gangmate in a Drake lands, and I'll speak more about him later. But once the Tempest goes down, the next closest thing is the Drake, and he's priority from here, And that quickly changes, however, because there's a hurricane that quickly burns past him while this Drake has stopped burning and he's just staying at the range he's at. And we know we can kill the hurricane much more quickly, and he's a much bigger threat because as he gets really close, he can do a lot of damage, and he has newts as well. So we go for him, and we almost get him down. He drops really quickly, but by this time, the basilisks who have been burning the entire time just manage to pick him up as he enters armor, and as he almost enters structure. He's in really low armor before he gets picked up. And this hurricane rightly decides to burn back. One thing we could have done was we webbed him right away, and we could have maybe waited until he turned around. And in this sort of situation, Will sort of had to web him. He couldn't really risk letting him get too much closer because he wasn't in a good situation tank and cap-wise, so he had to web him right away. But if things were going a little bit better for him specifically, it might have been better for all of us just to not web him at all until he decided to, turn around. And by that time, it might have been too late for him. As it was, though, he was able to turn around and go back to the basilisks, and they were able to rep him back up. Our next move from here is probably to go for the second hurricane, who's continuing to burn, and perhaps the time it takes the basilisk to rep up the hurricane, we might be able to get the second hurricane down. Unfortunately, in our situation right now, we're not very in a good position. One of our drakes is doing pretty poorly cap and tank wise, and he's decided to, think about leaving, and he eventually warps off and lets us know. And our second Drake isn't on comms, and we're having to communicate with him through fleet, and that's really not optimal at all. So we decide to get off grid, leave, regroup, and our intention is to come back in later and try it again once we've wrapped up. We don't get to do that, and the fight ends with us killing a Drake and a Tempest under dual logistics, which is pretty good. But to address the third gangmate, he was soloing in the system, and we just picked him up, invited him to our gang with the hopes that we'd get a little bit more damage and be able to kill things that made a mistake of getting away from the basilisks more quickly. But unfortunately, it wasn't as effective as we had planned, because our inability to sort of coordinate with him and get him on comms with us. And coordination and organization is a really big part of successful gang. And the lack of coordination and disorganization in larger groups is something we take advantage of a lot when we're engaging with fewer numbers. And it's part of why we're able to be so successful. So it's something everyone should be really mindful of when engaging, and always try to be as organized as possible.